Hey, welcome back to Vortex Garage, and yep, we're getting more work done on our Spitfire. So you last saw with our rear quarter panel on the right-hand side that, well, we had removed it, we had fixed some rust damage here and here, and we did a coat of this Eastwood rust preventative rust encapsulator, as they call it. And what we wanted to do today was go ahead and work on getting that new quarter panel fit and installed here on the car. So just like any other panel that we've shown you on the Spitfire, we are going to do a fair amount of fitment, mock-up, testing, tweaking, all that good stuff before we do any welding. So a few things that I want to do. I want to come along all of the edges here. As you can see here, that we didn't do anything to dress the edge here yet. So we've got a little bit of the surface rust that goes between the panels. We've also got on some of the spot welds that we cut. If I kind of show you like that, you can see they're raised a little bit. So we need to trim those down. So we're just going to want to come in here and clean up all of our edges in terms of any surface rust, raised spot welds. And also here where we did the rust encapsulator, we got some of that up onto the edge itself. It's not a weld through primer, so we want to knock that down and then put a little weld through primer. So we're going to basically dress all of our edges. That would include our light base along this edge here, up underneath the wheel well, because this is the lip where it actually welds to. Of course, down around here. And then on the inside of our door frame, we'll come back to this in just a second. This would be the door jamb. And then of course up along the top here. So I have done a, let me spin around so the camera can see me. I have done a little bit of work. Let's go back to our door jamb and I'll show you what I did. So on our door jamb, we did have a few spots when we were, if you remember on the video, when we got the panel removed, we drilled through a few areas with our spot weld cutter, and we just had some general damage and tweaked pieces here and there. So I cut those out and welded in new pieces of steel. So we've got a nice flange that we can weld to, and we'll be all ready to go there. Along here, I also trimmed and cut some of the old brazed on material that was left behind. I accidentally cut a little bit into there with my cutoff wheel, so I did a little spot of weld there I'll need to clean up. Same with the edge here. So we'll need to prep that just a little bit to kind of get everything fit up, and we'll show you how we do that. But that's all good and taken care of. And well, I think the next thing is to grab the quarter panel and do a rough fit and just sort of show you what we're dealing with, and then talk about how we'll prep that panel. So let me go fetch it. So here is our new quarter panel, and I've been trying to keep it in the box so that I don't get it all messed up. I've already got one scratch on it, but that's no big deal. But luckily, this thing fared pretty well in shipping. Spitbits did a good job sending it to us. I do see one little area in the light, and you can't even feel it, but it almost looks like there's a tiny bit of a bump right there. That's about it. It otherwise looks pretty nice. So to get this fit up, we're going to start by, as you can see here, which hopefully you can see on that camera, there's a lip here that goes underneath our rocker panel. So that's as good a place as any to start with our fitment. So we're going to want to slide that piece in to our rocker panel, right so, and then this goes over our door jamb, and then the back piece goes over our lamp base assembly. Make sure that the lip goes over our inner wheel well lip. I guess that's what you call it. All these things have technical terms. I did have to clean up a little here where that lead work was, and it does look like lead. It is silver color, so we wore our mask and ground that down with our belt sander. Got it out of the way. Obviously that's going to come into play. I want to just get rid of all that so I can weld if I need to weld something. So I got a little more to grind out there so I can get down to actual steel, weld against the steel, and not have to deal with lead fumes. But as you can see, it's fitting pretty nicely. There's a little bit of a gap here. I don't know what it would have looked like from the factory. Let me turn. I don't know what camera's which anymore. There is a tiny bit of a gap here, but we can move it just slightly, and we'll be able to fill that in. So it's more gap than I would have wanted. But I'm not sure how much of that we're going to be able to fill with just the panel. We might have to do some metal work and body work when we get to that stage. But to me, that's a small spot, and the rest of this is lining up really, really well just by slapping it on. I can also see in here my mark of where this body line would be. And I have that same mark. I don't know if you can see it well, that's a wide camera angle. It's pretty well close to where I made the mark there. And it does match up with our body line as we would have expected it from the car. So when we get this clamped in, we might lay our door on. Who am I looking at here? When I get this clamped in, we might do another lay the door in, make sure that we're going to see some matching up of body lines, just sort of get it close. But to be honest with you, there's not a whole lot of play here in terms of this thing. There might be a little upward play just because I have a few areas. I got a hammer and dolly on the edge. And the other thing is, let me take this off and I'll show you a few areas of concern. I don't want to have this fall as I'm talking to you, so let me go put it back in the box. So one area that I do have to work on that I forgot to show you, let me grab this little camera. So the other area was, remember I had to repair and replace this panel here. Well, what I didn't do is make the lip for the inner wheel liner, so I got to add that lip. And I noticed when I was putting this on, and I think I marked it here, yeah, just a little bit of area here I marked that this was actually hitting the quarter panel, not allowing it to sit flush here. So I had a feeling that was the case. A lot of times when I'm cutting stuff, I want to leave room that I can trim later rather than have to add material. So this radius was hopefully just slightly bigger than it needed to be in some areas, and it looks like just around the bottom part of it, I can probably shave some of that off, maybe like 1/8 of an inch, just to gain the fitment that I want. So I'll need to get that right. Once that's right, I can go ahead and make the rest of this. I didn't want to do that blindly without the old panel attached. So we left this work for us when we do our mock-up. Other than that, our flange here is a little bit big, so we'll cut that. I also, made a mark in here. On our new piece that we added, I intentionally made that too big. So you can see there's some cut marks that I made when I had it mocked up off camera. That's about it. I'll show you the lead again. Don't know if you can see because of the light there. Now you can kind of see it if I shield the light a little bit, but you can see there's a bit of gold material and then there's the silver. It looks like it did have lead, but it did also have some brazed, probably bronze on it as well. So you can see two types of material here. So we're going to get rid of all the lead so that if we need to weld there, we can do that. We'll show you that, of course, when we get to it. But other than that, I think what we're going to do today is we're just going to do a lot of cleanup and prep work and some test fitting. Well, 8 minutes of talking and we're finally getting to work. All we're going to do here is work on cleaning up the edges, knocking down the spot welds, cleaning up any surface rust, and any of that rust encapsulator that we painted too far. Now remember, as you're doing this, you really don't want to grind down the good stuff below the metal. So you got to take real care to grind down the high spots, but not actually grind the actual metal behind it. It's tedious work, but we'll speed it up here to make it a little more interesting. Well, you get the picture and you get the story. I'm going to continue cleaning these up. We'll come back when we're finished with that, and we're going to do a little hammer and dolly work to get these all nice and straight. Next up was some hammer and dolly work on the edges. The goal here is to make everything straight, especially where you are prying against them, removing the old panel. So take your time, go through with the hammer and dolly, and just make sure everything's straight, taking time to check your progress as you go along. And now this will be the first of many mock-up fitments of the rear quarter panel. Now don't expect things to fit perfectly on the first try, and don't be discouraged.
There's always going to be something that needs to be tweaked, repaired, or modified. Just take it in stride, make a plan, and work through it.
All right, we got the quarter panel just sitting on there. We're going to show you a couple areas of fitment that we're going to want to look at. So first off, we're going to want to look at this piece here. And it looks like back here we've got a little bit of adjustment up and down that we can do. You're going to want to look here as well. And it looks like this piece where we put this new piece in, let's see if we can look up at it here. We might need to trim that and make that a straight flange to go with here. But other than that, our flange here seems to fit out okay. All along here, our wheel well seems to fit pretty good. Then we come to here. Again, you can see our line and that body line seem to line up pretty good. I did trim this, so now we're fitting flush against that seam. You can see here we've got more of a gap here than I would have wanted, and I don't think we're going to be able to move this over as much. There is some gap that can be had here by pushing this in a little bit. This is out here a little bit, so we could gain maybe a 1/16 of an inch here. And I think we can do that without impacting the rear alignment too much. And if I look here, I do have a little bit of room here as well. So I think we can still tweak this forward a little bit and fill this in. And I think that we're going to find that our gap here is actually pretty reasonable, and that our quarter panel is, not, I keep saying quarter panel, rocker panel is put on the way it should be. It's hard to, and it's a domino effect. Any little tiny 1/16 of an inch here, 1/16 of an inch there, blah, 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 it can turn into what really isn't that big of a gap, but that's a gap that needs to be filled. It's about 3/16 of an inch. So we'll be able to move this over. You can see I've got these welds loose. This door jamb is loose. There's a little bit of movement that you can kind of see that whole mechanism does. So we're going to want our door laying in place so we can kind of make sure we don't close those up. And then our door is going to be the key thing to work to fill the gaps in. So what I want to do is just make sure that these shut lines match up here, which they kind of are. They're matching up pretty good. This one, not perfect, but we can fix that later on. Make sure that our body line matches where it should. And all in all, not bad. So again, this is literally our second time we've laid this on. I wouldn't even call it a fitment at this point. We're just looking for the areas that we're going to have to work, and mainly checking, is there anywhere that we need to trim material? See, our line up here actually looks pretty decent. So all in all, for a second fitment, we're looking pretty decent. I've got this taken care of, which was a big area of concern, was getting this to fit flat. So what I should be able to do now is go ahead and build the rest of the lip here, which will come down to about right here. So from here to here, we're going to have to make with the shrinker stretcher a nice folded over lip so we can continue spot welds down here and make this nice and secure. But this radius is good, so I'm happy with this radius. All right, so you can kind of see here that in that radius, we do have that point that is still hitting our rocker panel. You can see where there's some material off, so we're going to need to just shave that down a little bit. And then you can see that our radius gets a little bit further away as we go, which isn't too bad, because what we're going to do, we're going to need to make a channel that goes in there and weld. So it's going to bend over twice, 2 90s basically, with about a 1/2 inch in between. So we're going to need to kind of measure that out, and that'll give us room to go up and over. But we're going to want to kind of record that. And again, it has to be with this sitting flush, and I do need to trim that before we can get perfect, since that's touching. So we'll figure that out, get that tweaked. The door jamb is currently not held on by anything, and you can kind of see it's pretty flexible. Now the only problem is I can't reach behind it here because of the wheel tub. But if you look inside the car, look on the other side there, there's some openings. So what we should be able to do is 2 things. We can use our self-drilling or self-tapping drills like we did on some of our other panels to tighten this gap up and bring them together. And that'll actually pull this panel forward into this piece. But we can also go through those access holes with a push type tool, the end of a hammer, crowbar, or something like that. Just get behind this panel, push it forward, and get our welds nice and tight. Looks like we've also got some cleanup to do up here. You can kind of see this piece, how it lays over. So I haven't finished cleaning up the lead off of here, but I'm going to get rid of all that so we have steel to weld to and figure out how this wants to lay and get it on. But everything on this upper seam is actually looking pretty good. But I think really the key points, and I know I talk a lot, but that's okay. This is a pretty intricate piece, and sharing what I'm finding on my car that you might want to look out for. But I think the biggest thing is I'd like to bring this forward. And as you can kind of look here a little closer, this is a little off from where this ridge ends. So this will definitely move forward a little bit. And you can kind of see there, just tapping it lightly, I can get it to move forward. So we're going to want to bring this forward. We're going to want to manage our lip here, make sure this is nice and tight. We're going to need to build this last bit of radius right here and weld that in. Then we're going to need to come back here and make sure that this all lines up. You can see it gets pretty flexible back here, so we're going to want to line it up. Make sure that this flange is far enough down. Pretty sure that it is. And I'm pretty sure we're not having any major fitment issues with our new radius that we put in, which is good. We could have very easily, but luckily we had the old one to model off of. I think that's about it. I think other than that, so we should be pretty good. I think that's our main areas of concern. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to take this piece of scrap metal, which is a section of our 18 gauge sheet metal that's just big enough to use for what we need. And we're going to form this into the rest of the wheel well lip, the inner wheel liner lip that our quarter panel will attach to. So we're going to need to do a couple bends on it, and then we're going to need to put it in the shrinker stretcher and get a little bit of curvature to it. So what we're going to do is one 90-degree bend, and then another 90-degree bend to end up with a U. And then we're going to cut off one of those so that we only have just the curvature of the U, and then we're going to weld that onto our piece over there so that we have that nice curvature on both sides, and our weld seam is just past the curve. And that should still allow us to use our shrinker stretcher to do what we need to do. In fact, we can probably do that cut later. Let's bend it first, and you'll see what I'm doing. It'll make some sense. So first I need some measurements off the car. So our center U piece is going to be a 3/4 of an inch. Of course, we'll measure that. And just to have a little extra, I'd like to have 3/4 of an inch on our lip, and then whatever's left over. So let's measure this out. We'll use this nice edge here. I'm just going to put a couple of reference marks. It's 3/4. That. I'm going to take my sort of straight edge. And I'm not aiming for perfection here. I just want to get relatively close. So there's a bend line. And let's see if we can do another 3/4. It's not going to leave a ton, but good enough. All right, let's straight line that one. Okay, so this side we'll use for our inner piece of our lip. This side will be our top part, and then this is where we're going to weld, so we'll be able to trim this off, so we don't need a ton of that. So let's go ahead and do our bends. Should be able to knock those out. All we do now is bend up. 90. There we go. I'm sure with 20 gauge it does a sharper bend, but it does good enough for what we need. All right, so now what I'd like to do, flip it over and bend this piece up so that we'll end with a U-shaped channel. But I'll need it in a second. So here is our U channel, and this is going to end up on our wheel well. So what I'd like to do is on this piece, I'd like to leave just a small attachment point where we can do the weld on the side. So I'm going to throw this back under here so I can hold it, not to bend it. And then lock this down just with this one. Just lock it right here, that'll be good. Okay, and then I'm going to come to the other side of the table. Give myself a cut line. Like that. That'll be plenty. Piece that's too long, so that's fine. We can chop some of this off. You can see on the car. Looks like we can cut a good inch of it off. So haphazard drawing there. We'll chop that off really quick. Now all we got to do, take our part into our shrinker stretcher, and specifically our shrinker. And as you can see, we're getting a nice curve to it already. We're going to do a little bit at a time, and then we're going to check our progress on the car. All right, so let's take you and look at the car. Here's where we're working. I am going to have to trim this a little bit. And the idea is that this will sort of sit down on that. And that curve's almost perfect. How did that happen? I got it almost right on the first try. So at any rate, we're going to want to go ahead and do that here and then go ahead and get that married up. Now the only thing that I see as a potential problem, of course, this shrinks as it comes down. I don't know if it needs to stay this width. Here on this side, it certainly stayed that way. But what we can do as we put this in, after we weld it, we can always move it this way a little bit. This is flexible. So what we're going to do, like I said, we're going to trim this down, weld this onto here once we get our radius, which, geez, that was totally unintentional, but that radius is perfect. It almost matches that as identical as it should. and then we'll go ahead and get that welded on. Now the reason I left this little piece of a lip here is what I did on this side was I just welded a 90 degree and then I ground the weld down. It was a fair amount of weld grinding and getting it smooth to look nice, and it came out okay. But by doing it this way, we've got a nice bend already in the piece. We don't have to form that with a weld. So our welds are just a few millimeters past that. We grind those welds flat and they look nice and everyone's happy. Though it looks like we'll need to trim a little more on this edge because our piece does not go all the way down to here. It actually kind of curls in and goes against this flange. So we'll do that. So we can trim a little more. We'll mark that, cut it, and we'll work on trimming this piece up, and we'll show you what it looks like after we get it kind of fit and installed. But pretty simple, huh? We just took a little piece of scrap metal and about 10 minutes worth of work. We've got a workable piece here. It's actually pretty simple. All right, we're gonna leave it like that, and then we can tweak it just a little bit. Just two simple tacks. Bend it down a little bit. Move it over how we want. And the key is I want to get my piece I'm going to fit my quarter panel on, and I'm going to check my fit before I weld it in. And actually, let's see, pretty happy with that. The only fitment issue that I'm having is it looks like I'm going to have to bend this out a little bit to have this reach here. So I'm going to have to do a little fitment, but I want to push that further in anyway. So if I do that, the fit's not bad at all. So we should be good to go ahead and weld this in a little bit, pull this back piece out. So basically, I know it's hard to see on camera, but right here, I can probably hold that. I did not have a quarter panel here before. Let me make sure you can see. So we drew this piece, we drew that and cut it and installed it before we even had this. So when I test fit this yesterday, the radius was touching down here and there was a gap up here. So what I'm seeing right now is kind of similar. So I'm just going to trace our line here, and I'm going to break the tacks. I'm going to trace this curvature, which matches here, and I can even use my panel gauge. And then I'm going to try to manipulate this, cut it a little more aggressively, and put a little bit more of a bend in this, tack it back in. Won't take long at all. Snap our tacks off. If you look here, I had a little bit more of an aggressive line that we want to make.
Now that we had an accurate measurement, we could rework this radius to be a perfect fit. So there was a fair bit of testing, getting templates, going through and cutting and trimming, and test fitting again, and we'll speed things up here to move that along. Now let's see how we did.
We got our radius changed, it's a little bit tighter. We're going to go ahead and tack it and try our fitment one more time. So that corrected our angle. Everything's nice and tight fitting. I can feel it. It's touching here. And I'll be able to push this forward just enough to get into there. And I'll be able to move that. So it looks like on the top I can move that just a tiny bit in, but on the bottom we're just fine. So our gaps are much better. This is going to work really nicely. So we'll make that one adjustment, and then let's go ahead and start welding it in.
Now that we've finally confirmed the fitment is accurate, we can go ahead and weld in this new piece that we built.
I'm on the lowest voltage setting, and this stuff is so thin where this old metal was. It just melts away like butter. The best you can do, what you can hope to do, is ride up on the thicker metal, this 18 gauge, and to just sort of roll the bead into there and get it to attach. This stuff is so thin. It's probably worn down from grinding and just general surface rust and being stamped. There just isn't much left. So we did that on our lowest voltage setting, connecting it to here. We were able to use our second volt setting on our little Hobart 140 and do a nice solid bead here because we got nice 18 gauge metal all the way around. And once we grind this down, we're going to have an awesome looking curve that's just going to be hidden anyway, but it's going to look nice and we'll know it's nice and strong. And here we've at least got it attached to this wheel well. So if we're hammering on this, we'll move the whole piece at once rather than each section at a time. So that's a good milestone today. We're going to let this cool off. We'll hit it up with the grinder a little bit, but this is a good step to have. Nice. That'll work, and we've got edge to trim. Once we get everything mounted up, we'll trim that edge to match. You'll never see this, never know it was there, but it'll be perfect. And it'll be strong, and it'll hold our quarter panel nicely. All right, so that's one more little piece out of the way, and one step closer to having our quarter panel installed.
So that's pretty much going to wrap our video up for today. Now we did do a little bit more trimming on the flange in the back, and then we went ahead and did a test fit of the door. Unfortunately, in the footage, I had left the music on in the shop, so I'm just going to have to kind of walk you through this here. Basically, what we did is we laid the door into the rocker panel aperture and checked all of our shut lines, made sure that our body lines worked and lined up, and everything was looking pretty good. One of the big things that you're checking for is that your basic fit is there. If there's a humongous gap, or heaven forbid the thing doesn't fit at all, you've got a bigger problem that you got to work out. And note that we're clamping everything in place before we do this. We haven't touched the welder. Everything's movable on this rear quarter for the time being. So what we're going to do on the next video is we're going to go ahead and prep this panel, do some final steps, and start welding it in. So join us back here for more on Vortex Garage.